Welcome to the Tesla Power Podcast. This is where we're building the Tesla energy community. We're covering solar panels, solar roof, and Powerwall for your home. I'm Aaron Brady, and today let's talk about ELRP in California. Let's talk about Americans getting hosed on installation costs. Let's talk about solar production variation by geography. Let's talk about prioritizing budget. Should you get production? Should you get storage? And let's talk about taking control of your power destiny. Sounds like a Tenacious D record. Let's do it. As per usual, we will kick off the podcast with community input. You can participate in a few ways. You can leave a comment below. You can link your YouTube videos. You can call 203-816-5150, or you can email teslapowerpodcast@gmail.com. And first up, we have jscott1213. He's asking about Tesla's ELRP in California. Let's read it. Quote, do you have more information about Tesla's ELRP, Emergency Load Reduction Program? A virtual power plant, Tesla will pay annually $2 for every additional kilowatt hour delivered during an event for a maximum of 7 events. PG&E and or Tesla would control battery discharge. End quote. And as jscott1213 notes, ELRP stands for Emergency Load Reduction Program. It's a pilot program using Tesla Powerwalls to provide additional load capacity during an emergency event. Now, load capacity is the other half of the load equation, right? You've got capacity on one side and you've got reduction on the other side. That's in the name. And these programs are the same as the demand response program that I mention on this podcast all the time. Now, the point is to prevent brownouts, prevent potential damage to the grid by both reducing the load required, and they're going to do that by paying customers to take load off the grid, use less electricity. And the other is to increase load capacity by paying customers to add their residential battery capacity to the grid. The residential battery capacity is on that grid is aggregated using a control software platform that can be controlled as a single unit or as a virtual power plant. Now, there are 2 places to get detail on the program. The first is on the PG&E website. If we pull that up, it is in press release form. So I wouldn't say it's in the best way to consume this information, but they do say, quote, participating customers receive $2 for every incremental kilowatt hour of electricity their Powerwall discharges during an event. Through their Tesla app, customers can set their backup power needs to ensure that they still have enough energy for their personal essential needs in the event of an outage, or they can opt out of an event completely in the app as necessary. PG&E resident customers are eligible if they own a Powerwall, if they have an internet connection agreement with PG&E, and if they're not enrolled in another demand response program, end quote. And we can see corresponding docs on the Tesla website. In fact, they're better laid out. And you can expect that kind of thing from Tesla. They do a really good job of making information digestible. So this is the landing page itself. If we scroll down a little bit, we can see here that they echo the compensation for that program. Through the Emergency Load Reduction Program pilot, you'll receive $2 for every additional kilowatt hour your Powerwall delivers during an event, end quote. And it's important to note that it's additional kilowatt hours, not just the entirety of the kilowatt hours during an event. We'll talk more about that in a minute. In that page, you can see just below this, there are several links that give you additional detail about the program. Of course, the most interesting one is the compensation link. So let's click it. And we can see that they note, quote, lower your backup reserve to earn more, end quote. And that means if you have more capacity available, that means if they need it, you have the potential of being paid more during that event. Now, they do have a couple of sample calculations. So one of the sample calculations below says, quote, example 1, a 1 Powerwall system with a backup reserve of 20% that's fully charged at the start of an event has 13.5 kilowatt hours available. Taking out the reserve of 20%, you have 18.8 kilowatt hours that you can contribute during that event. Now, if this system would typically serve 3 kilowatt hours of energy during the event hours, fully dispatching the Powerwall down to the backup reserve would deliver 7.8 kilowatt hours of additional kilowatt hour energy. At $2 per kilowatt hour, this could be worth $15.60 for this event, end quote. And if we scroll down a little bit further in the payment portion of the article, it says, quote, your payment will come from Tesla, and you can expect payment before the end of March 2023, end quote. And if you're part of this program, please let me know in the comments below. It'd be really interesting to see how much owners are getting paid for the first year in this program. It'd also be helpful to understand what Tesla's cut might be. It'd be interesting to know because, you know, they're saying that they are going to be pulling from your Powerwall, whether it's an emergency event or not. And if you normally, on average, are providing about 3 kilowatt hours of energy capacity during a normal day, not an emergency event, then the amount they're going to pay you for is just the capacity beyond that average that you're going to be offering during that part of the day. And when there are those kinds of spikes in demand, the amount that they can get at auction for that energy capacity is going to go way up. And it's kind of like the, the very simple economic curve, supply and demand. If there's not enough supply, but there's a huge amount of demand, every incremental bit of supply you can provide is going to get a lot at auction. So they did their test program last year to kind of get an idea of what the numbers should work out to. And I would bet that $2 is pretty conservative as far as the split between what will actually be collected at auction versus what they're agreeing to pay customers ahead of time. Because this is a risk-free amount that you're going to get paid, $2 per kilowatt hour. I'll bet Tesla ends up getting paid $5, $6, maybe $10 per kilowatt hour for some of that generation capacity. If I'd been thinking ahead of time, I would have looked up some of those charts. I'm not sure they're going to be available, but I'll bet we can find some examples of some crazy high kilowatt hour rates that are paid to electricity generators when there's just too much demand on the grid. Now, I think it's pretty clear that PG&E is paying Tesla, right? In this agreement, they say that you will get your payment from Tesla. You will not get any sort of payment from PG&E in the form of electricity bill credits. And there's a further nugget in Section 6 of the program agreement. Let's read that. Let me pull that up. So in Section 6, they say those payments, if any, are the only compensation that the participant will receive from Tesla and PG&E for their participation in the ELRP, end quote. All of this is very exciting for Tesla investors. This could really mean a lot of money for the company in the form of profits. And this is beyond just their sale of energy products like batteries, solar roofs, solar panels, and installation services. But it's also great news for those customers that have already bought those assets. They can now make money back beyond what they were planning to make just based on energy savings. So great news all around. Next, we've got Mark Specjial. I think that's how you say it. Really tough to tell. But he asked a question that really surprised me. Let's read this. Why is solar install so much cheaper in Europe and Australia? Americans are taken advantage of even with government subsidies, end quote. Say what now? We're getting hosed in the US for installations? I have a couple of questions. Number one, how do you know we're getting hosed? And what price should we be expecting to pay to install solar? Thinking about it a little bit, I have a couple of quick guesses as to why we might be paying more for those solar installations on average. The first thing that came to mind is that electricians are unionized and cost more than standard construction workers, at least here in the US, and maybe that's not true in Australia or in Europe. The other thing is electricians must do that work and can't simply manage and inspect the work, and maybe that's something that you can do over in Europe and Australia. I do know that for a fact here in my state of Connecticut. California, for example, they do allow non-electricians to install solar panels, though you have to be licensed as an electrician to connect everything up. I don't know. All of this is changing as consumer production laws, make it harder for California solar installers to use cheaper labor to contribute to that bulk solar installation work. I don't know. I had one other quick thought too. We tax solar panels when they're imported, compliments of our last president, and still in effect under our current president, although we'll talk about that in a second. Those import tariffs, they inflate the cost of solar panels 30% to U.S. customers. So that's nothing to sneeze at. But let me know what the factors were in your calculation. It'd be really interesting to get more detail on that. See if we really are getting hosed and what we can do about it. It'd be great to do something about it if we can. All right. Next, we've got SY commented on episode 42, quote, significant difference in production numbers depending on locations. Here in San Francisco Bay Area and California, 7.2 kilowatt systems will produce 11.6 thousand kilowatts annually, end quote. And 11.6 megawatts would be another way of saying that. Now, that nameplate is actually pretty good. So if your nameplate system is 7 kilowatts, which is in this example, then 1,000 times that would be 7.2 megawatts. And that's pretty darn good. So I've got a suboptimally installed 13 kilowatt system. It's produced pretty close to 1,000 times its nameplate in just 6 months of production. But let's take a look at the app, because it's interesting to take a look at what the actual numbers are. So we're not talking about hypotheticals, right? If we've got actual numbers, we should be showing those. So in the Tesla app, I can divide everything by year. But my 13 kilowatt system, just to make it easy, round numbers, 13 kilowatts. I'll pull it up here. You can see in 2021, my 13 kilowatt system produced 7.4 megawatt hours. So less than 1,000 times its nameplate. So 13,000 versus 13 kilo versus 13 mega, right? 1,000-fold difference. But in 2022, in just the first 6 months, I've generated 10 megawatt hours, which is really close to that nameplate. Now, you were talking about a full annual capacity. I mean, at this rate, 10 plus 7 is 17. So I'm going to be producing pretty close to the same amount that this 7.2 kilowatt example is producing. But I'm in a lower sun part of the United States. My favorite thing to look at is the sun hours map. So let me pull that up. I've got it here. And you can see that the California area is in very clearly the 5 peak sun hour region. And that means that in California, you're going to be able to generate a lot more solar production from a lower nameplated system. Now, that does still presume that it's optimally phased, right? So I'm way up here in Connecticut, and you can see I get almost a whole hour less per day of sun. So I should be generating 13 kilowatt hours. Is that right? 13 kilowatt hours less energy per day than you would in California, more or less. Now, I mean, I do get that San Francisco has a lot of fog. It reduces your peak sun hours annually. But if we look at the peak sun hours map, you show to be in that much higher production location. And I should get much worse performance from my system. It is possible that panels aren't all facing south. I've mentioned several times that half of my solar roof tiles are facing north, for example. And you might have quite a bit of shading in your system. In the Tesla solar string inverters, if one of the panels is producing suboptimally, the rest in that string are forced to produce a little bit less as well. That all can affect performance very significantly. So let us know if there are other mitigating factors that add to your lower yield specifically. It'd be interesting to hear more about how those kinds of things affect production in your area. We do have one more. I said we were already on the last one, but we have this next one. This is Jones 1. They had to balance priorities and budget. Let's read what they were working on here. Quote, I wish I could get 2 Powerwalls. I felt like I had to get the largest solar array that I could first, and then add the Powerwall to complete my system. I chose a 12 kilowatt system with 1 Powerwall, and I'll have to run without AC at night if there's a grid outage. And as long as I can run the essentials, maybe a portable AC unit could do. And if the outage lasts longer than a couple of days, right? Thanks for the video, end quote. And if you have net metering, it definitely makes sense to put more budget into generation rather than into storage. And then by the time you're ready to upgrade your system in, the 25 years that it's expected to last, the cost of battery storage will have come down to a point that you'll be able to get more storage than you can ever use. And you probably won't be under net metering at that point either. So, you'll be able to upgrade your system to generate a lot more power as well. So maybe you would end up using that battery capacity. It just kind of depends on how the system, performs at that point. And we won't even know, take the perspective of how things looked 25 years ago. You had to pay $1 bazillion to barely generate anything, and battery storage wasn't even an option. So things to think about. Next, we've got Jason Dalton. He's getting ready to install solar at his house. Quote, I have the Tesla survey in 2 weeks, 16 kilowatt and 3 Powerwalls coming sometime thereafter. We live in the Phoenix Valley, and I suspect grid problems from all the inflow population and new housing, and also rate increases. We feel pretty good about taking control of our power destiny. Should power my 2 Tesla cars and 8 tons of AC independent of the grid. At least that's the hope. Good podcast. Appreciate you, end quote. And I also saw your note on episode 36 that your utility is limiting your system size to 15 kilowatts. And that kind of sucks, right? But it's important for the stability of the grid that they do this. I would say, though, if you're able to install batteries to buffer the production, they should make a little bit of an exception, right? But I did a little digging to see if the Phoenix area utility has any battery storage on its grid. And I see where you're at. You are in the SRP service area. That's the Salt River Project, which is a nonprofit company based on hydroelectric generation resulting from damming the Salt River. Now, hydro is super green. It's great. And if you look at their sustainability report, you can see they have 0 batteries. So let's pull that up really quickly. And it's a little bit of a bummer, to be frank. You can see here that there is no battery capacity planned, but they do have a goal of supporting up to 500,000 cars. So you can see they have several different goals. Several different ways they've divided their goals so that they can accomplish them. And honestly, I think this sustainability report is really good. It's doing a great job of setting up the goals in an honest and achievable way. But this is the one that I found very, very interesting. 500,000 electric vehicles adopted by 2035, while still not providing any battery storage in their plan. I mean, they do include a demand response program, but it only includes load reduction. It does not include increased load capacity, meaning Powerwalls or even aggregated Powerwalls. And it's only available for commercial customers, not available for residential customers at all. So that's something you and your fellow SRP customers might start making some noise about. As you know, I've been beating the drum on the importance of battery storage for a bit now. The more we can get, the better, and the better it's going to be for renewable capacity. Not super important for hydro, but it will be important for those solar customers coming up online to make sure that the grid can be stable and to make sure that customers are allowed to put much larger solar arrays on their roof. Anyway, thanks to jscott1213, Mark Specjial, SY, Jones1, and Jason Dalton, all of you for your input. The more input, the better. Send your YouTube links, your comments below. Call 203-816-5150 or email teslapowerpodcast@gmail.com. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into the news. All right, this episode we have 4 stories to cover, and we're going to do them pretty quickly. First up, we have Electrek. They send a news flash. Quote, President Joe Biden will today waive tariffs for 24 months on solar panels made in Southeast Asia in response to a Department of Commerce investigation that's destabilizing the U.S. solar industry, end quote. I had just gotten done saying that there was a large tariff, right? 30%, and giving that as the reason for high prices for solar in the United States. And of course, they've now been waived. It is temporary. It's only a slight departure from the Trump era, as it's likely to come back. Now, does this make a huge difference? You know, it's not make or break. It is helping the industry because it's putting an incentive back in place, but every little bit helps. Of course, the most important bit at the moment, batteries. So what do they do? You know, if import tariffs aren't going to make much difference for overall adoption in the United States, they need to get more battery capacity on the grid to support the deployment of more solar without becoming unstable and failing, right? What good are the import tariffs if it's just going to crash our grid if we put more capacity? What good is lifting those import tariffs if, you know, adding the capacity is just going to make our grid unstable? All right, next up, we have one from, we have an article from Reuters. They've been watching this podcast, obviously. They say, quote, the U.S. renewable energy developers have delayed or scrapped several big battery projects meant to store electrical power on the grid in recent months, scuttling plans to replace fossil fuels with wind and solar energy. It goes on saying storing power, it's way down here, is considered vital to the expansion of solar and wind energy because it allows electricity generated when the sun is shining or wind is blowing to be used at the end of the day when customers need it most. The delays span states including California, Hawaii, and Georgia, with battery providers including Tesla and Fluence. They're warning of disruptions to supply, according to a review of regulatory documents, corporate statements, and interviews with project developers and power providers, end quote. And we just heard from Tesla's earnings call that they prioritized higher margin Powerwall deployments over Megapack last quarter. It's certainly affecting some projects, though none of them are scrapping their projects. Now, Fluence is new to me, so let's check those guys out. Let's get a little bit better educated on what they're doing. You can see they're owned by Siemens. It's really small in this, but if you go to the website, fluenceenergy.com. All of this is in the show notes below, so you can look at it, look it up yourself. They're owned by Siemens, which is a German industrial conglomerate, and they provide both storage and grid services software utilities needed to accommodate renewables, including the focus of this podcast, which is residential solar. Now, looking a little deeper, I found a couple of very interesting companion articles on their battery tech. The first one was from Bloomberg. Let's bring it up. They use Northvolt for their general cells. You can see here highlighted. This will include batteries made by Europe's Northvolt, following an agreement between the two companies last year, right? And then in a data center article, energy storage firm Fluence signs to use QuantumScape's solid-state batteries. So they signed a deal with QuantumScape to integrate solid-state batteries in the future. Now, these are interesting because both of these techs are new and neither are scaled very far yet. The QuantumScape thing is actually a bunch of crap, in my opinion, and solid state isn't even needed for energy dense, or it's really only needed for energy dense applications, not for stationary grid storage applications. So this doesn't even make sense to me. I'm not sure they can use cells other than Northvolt. Well, actually, I am sure they can use other cells other than Northvolt, and probably already do, but I wasn't able to find any articles confirming that. I expect the chemistry to be lithium ion, lithium ion, right? But according to its website, let's pull up the Northvolt website. They use only lithium ion cells. So, quote, a battery cell manufacturer at heart, Northvolt offers high-performance lithium-ion cells. High-performance lithium-ion cells based around proprietary lingonberry NMC chemistry available in cylindrical and prismatic formats, end quote. I don't know. It's a really poor strategy for scaling. If Fluence is serious about meeting the needs of grid scale storage, it won't hang its hat on solid state or lithium ion batteries. It doesn't make any sense. I digress a bit here. Ultimately, these grid service providers need more battery capacity to serve more renewable energy generation, and supply chain is kicking a lot of them in the teeth. Let's see what we can do to solve those issues, right? A little bit concerning. All right, next up, Solar Builder Magazine asked an interesting question. Why should PV installers care about solar cell efficiency? So let's read it. Quote, but how many installers really dig deeper into why their panels keep getting better and why should they care? Installers who've been in the business for a decade or so remember when they were installing 250 watt modules on the roof and then 320s a few years later. These same installers now benefit from modules in the 400 to 450 watt class, and that's a 60% boost in less than 10 years. To put it in design terms, it takes 10 or fewer modules to outfit that simple 4 kilowatt roof system that needed 16 modules a decade ago. The benefits including more bang for the buck, more power density, lower racking or other balance of systems costs, and quicker installation times, end quote. And those lower costs mean more profitable businesses. It's not just that the installation labor and materials are cheaper, it's that the more efficient panels are more expensive and can contribute more margin to the overall project. The biggest reason, though, is that it'll allow potential customers to realize enough solar production to make the project worth it. It's not worth it to a home that only has room for 16 panels, but can only produce half the electricity they need to make the installation worth it. Now they can produce all of the electricity they need, maybe even a little bit more, which makes the project worth doing in the production side and only leaves the financial side as a potential hurdle. And as we talk about often on this podcast, incentives are bridging that financial gap for most customers, at least these days, right? This supports the industry. All of this supports the industry as it gets established and will ultimately mature the industry to the point where it no longer needs incentives to grow. In fact, most customers would rely just on financing to get over that hump. All right, last story for this podcast is giving renters a direction for looking to go solar. The best option, it's community solar. Let's read this CNET article. Quote, community solar allows people to subscribe to a portion of a solar array and receive credits for the electricity their portion generates. A community solar subscriber will often see credits on their utility bill, bringing down overall electricity costs, end quote. And now, not every renter will have access to community solar projects, but many more have access than you would expect. And these programs are made available, but aren't well understood or even well advertised when they're available. Now, I don't expect that very many people that watch this podcast are interested in community solar projects, but you might know renters that think they can't participate in the solar revolution. Now you know, and you can pass that information on to them, and you guys can vote for these projects as they come available in your communities. And that'll do it for the news. Let's take another quick break. When we come back, we'll get into the featured video. This show's clip comes from Real Vision Finance, which I'm sure is a great channel, but they are just a vehicle for their guest, Peter Zion. He's got a great channel on geopolitics that is worth a binge. So Real Vision Finance had him as a guest, I don't know, about a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago. And it's possible that you've run into other Peter Zion podcasts as he's been promoting his new book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning. And he's, ended up on the Anthony Pompliano podcast, Ark Invest, Sam Harris, several other high profile podcasts. And on this particular guest appearance, he gets into his current view on green tech and its ability to transition over the next 10 years. Let's watch.
Solar and wind work great in places that are sunny and windy. That's not where 80% of the human population lives. So we need a breakthrough in two things: long-range power transfer and energy storage. Now, a lot of people are talking about moving into batteries in a big way, and that's great. But batteries are one of the more environmentally damaging technologies we have. And if you're putting it in a place that doesn't have good wind or solar capacity, you're probably looking actually at a net carbon contribution to the system instead of a reduction. It's not true everywhere, but it is in most places. What we really need is something that's better than lithium. That's a material science question, and we don't have a prototype for that yet. So you should expect that code to be cracked not this decade. Because once you have the prototype, it then takes 10 years to expand the industrial footprint to mass produce it, and then another several years for mass application. So you're realistically, the best case scenario for green tech, you're talking the late 2030s.
And I would tend to agree. If Tesla is the leading indicator, and they aren't expecting to hit the top of the S curve for automotive until 2030, then we've got to be honest and say that there's probably very little hope that there'll be sufficient battery capacity for grid scale and residential battery storage to even start ramping until then. Of course, Tesla isn't the only one doing this, but I expect they'll be the fastest to scale. What's not great news, is if some of the other things Peter Zion is asserting end up being true as well. So I've fallen way down the rabbit hole on him, and I think you should too. He has a lot to say about demographic changes that will sound familiar to anyone that follows Elon Musk's concerns that the greatest threat to the world, apart from nefarious AI, of course, is depopulation. Now, I'm not a doomsdayist. I'm not a survivalist. I'm not an end of days kind of guy. But having a family and thinking through contingency plans for grid down events can get you thinking about stuff. What if the grid takes a while to come back? And what if water services are affected? And what if fuel is restricted? And what if that means deliveries to supermarkets are delayed for a while? Not that any of that would happen, but it's not like these things are unprecedented either, even in the United States. So if demographic change really does cut off globalization and things get harder and harder to accomplish, we might be missing our window to make this transition to sustainable and green tech possible. All of that gives me a lot more appreciation for Tesla's urgency and gives me more respect for their mission-driven approach and makes me want to spend more money with them and help them in that mission. Anyway, go check out Peter Zion's book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning. Go check out his geopolitics channel on YouTube. There's a really deep trove of information that I think you'd benefit from. Just at least hear what he's got to say, think about it, fit it into your worldview, ask some questions, and go do some research. Now, production on our system, it's starting to decrease noticeably. And of course, that's going to be because of the shorter days. Mostly anyway. We have had some pretty bad weather. At least a lot of clouds, I should say. It's not really that the weather's bad. Like, there's lots of pool moments, but full pool days are getting harder and harder to come by. Generally, our capacity, if we look at it our production, if we look at it on a day basis, yesterday was in the 40s. I mean, that was a really, really sad day, but that was because we had a lot of rain. But in the 40s, I mean, that's pretty poor. And we're still running the AC a lot because it's still so humid. So we are not even getting close to covering our usage at our current generation rates. Now, if we go over to my brother-in-law's system, he's got better production numbers than we do. He had been in the 70s, but you can see now he's fully below the 60s, and getting pretty close to the 50s on average. But because he's producing about 10 kilowatts, 10 kilowatt hours more than us per day, he's starting to pull away from our system on a monthly production basis. So this month he's generated 1.2 megawatt hours. If we go back to our system, so far this month, I mean, we're really not that far off. 1.2 megawatt hours. That's actually quite surprising. But 1.27, so he's closer to 1.3. But all in all, his AC is still down, so maybe they're producing less, but they're using way less. But they are a little bit miserable. I have followed up on rebooking the witness test. No word on that witness test just yet, but I do hope that I'll be able to get PTO before the end of the summer. We've had a few get-togethers at the house, and these things are pretty interesting. Both times we've had a big gathering at our house, someone has asked me, what's on your roof? What is that made of? When I tell them it's glass, they are super confused. My wife, though, she stepped up. She took up the pitch. She took the whole group around to tour the roof and took them downstairs to check out the inverters and the batteries. It's pretty attractive that she can get into the weeds with really knowledgeable people. I work with robotics engineers, software developers. They really know their stuff, and she's debunking their FUD and giving them an education. I was really proud. And it really surprises me that well-educated people barely know about the Tesla solar roof. I mean, maybe they've heard of it. Most of them hadn't even heard of it. I don't know. The ramp for that product seems to be, really slow. I guess it's baby steps. It's part of the mission of this, whole podcast is to get the word out and to educate people, get them the detail they need to, decide to get the Tesla solar roof and to decide to get batteries. So, I don't know. We'll just keep plugging away at it. Anyway, that'll do it for episode 62 of the Tesla Power Podcast. You can, if you want to get a solar roof, you can use my referral page. You can save $300 on a solar roof order. Or if you want to get solar panels, same thing, you'll save $300. You can go to ts.la/Aaron62310 to place your order. I'm Aaron Brady, your Tesla residential energy community organizer. This video was a little bit of a slog, if I'm going to be honest. I'm way out of the saddle. Let's get back into this, right? And we'll see you on the next video.